We're on. Okay, this is Senate Finance. This is May 15th. And we are going to finish up our work today on page 454. Find my spot in the agenda. And we will see where things come out. I would like to get you out of here just before 5, otherwise you're not leaving until 7 because of the corporate cup. I think in between groups of brothers, you might get the passage to get out, but it's challenging having done it on more than one occasion. And I think they used to just go down State Street, but because of the construction down there, they're coming up by here and it will be harder. This isn't just runners. This is all kinds of businesses have teams, and I have seen nursing homes pushing people in wheelchairs. So it tends to be a long race. By the time the first group is out, the last group's out, the first one's coming in. So I'm going to try and get you out. We walked through this yesterday. There were people that were very upset with the idea that we would start out saying that we were going to spend more, which so there were discussions, and I believe that we thought we would settle on the enhanced proposal brought to us by the administration. It turns out that there are some issues with being able to convert that to legislative language or something that we can use. So that leaves us with the House or the Senate version or something we can come up with in the next 10 minutes. And this is all going to conference. So everything, every topic that's here is on the table in conference and will get worked out. And then there's next year in which we will probably recalculate every one of these things once we know what the districts are. So Julia and Ezra, John is not here yet.
So he's on his way.
He's on his way.
Yeah.
Would it work better if we had John go first? Or I've got you all on here and I have no idea what would work for staff.
Director Defo, I think you have language to walk through
Okay,
from John, which he's coming over with. There are the Senate education numbers. We would like to walk through. Everything talks about the income, whatever you would like to hear.
John is on his way. I think it's easier. See if we can remember what we've agreed on. I think what I've got is we have agreed on the regional assessment districts. And that Kirby's language allowing them to go forward, but not naming them at this point, just giving them time to meet with the towns and get that set up. We've agreed on property classifications, and that got moved to a tax department study, so they will be back in December 1st. So when we come back next year, we will have their estimates as to how you break out, especially that multiple use properties, and how you might get tax classifications, because that is one lever we have not used in this bill. At this point, the proposal is that homestead and non-homestead will be taxed the same. That's something we have never done, at least since Act 60. And so that whole non-homestead question, will be there next year. Let's see. Okay, we did the transition, we agreed to do the transitioning in, I believe it is the Senate bill, of walking down and walking up the payment to schools. And we have agreed that we will walk up and walk down in some form, and I think there might be language coming in, the taxes when we get the future state. And we are able at that point to calculate what the actual base and weights will need to be. We're quite sure we're going to need to, allow some towns to ramp up taxes and some to ramp them down. And we've agreed to do that. We have agreed on the homestead exemption with example D, which was the last one. Kirby is here.
Hi. I'm gonna have to run soon. I know John and Beth will be here later. I
Okay.
thought I'd check in to see, do you want me to walk through my parts, the final version? It's the same as Monday. So I wasn't
Okay,
sure if
this
you-
is the whole assessment district. Do we need to have Kirby walk through that? Yeah.
No?
We went through it Monday.
All right,
I've got it marked off.
it's okay.
I think we're okay.
All right.
Everybody wants to be out of here for the quarter now.
Good luck to you the rest of the meeting. It's great.
I'm trying, okay, okay, and then Kirby had a couple of things for miscellaneous tax that we all agreed to. Base and weights, that's where we are now. We have not agreed on those. Supplemental district spending. We have agreed, I think, to allow it, but we haven't agreed if both 5%, 10% have been put out there. But we need to do a percentage. And then we need to do an equalization formula. I asked John, and that may be where he is. We had Senator Chittenden's proposal. However, he told me it would take several hours to figure out how to draft it. So, we have the House proposal with a yield, which I think some of us like because yield is a familiar thing. But there's some concern about if there's extra where it goes. We could, for the sake of discussion, they have it going to a school construction fund. For the sake of discussion, we could have it go to reduce the next year's taxes. Fall to the bottom bottom line at the end. So think about that. Senator.
I don't remember doing on the supplemental, did we do a straw poll?
On what?
Just supplemental spending in general, I don't remember. That I may have forgotten.
That is my sense from the discussion, but we can definitely read. It was 2 days ago, which means it's getting very vague, right?
And it depends on the foundation formula issues too, I would say, but I didn't realize we got that far.
What do I have in my notes?
If I recall, Madam Chair,
Yes,
I believe Senator Matos on the reflection position, but you were conditional based on whether or not the amount of spending would be above what we're currently spending. And I believe Senator Rock was opposed to supplemental district spending. So I think it was very mixed. And so we doubled back to the phase.
Okay.
That would determine.
and it was pending House raised. All right. In order to do that, then we are going to have to decide on the base. and dog weights. Julia, can you just share your numbers with us on those bases and weights?
Sure, Ezra actually did that one.
Ezra, okay. So Ezra,
Yeah.
Well, I had a feeling this was gonna happen. That's why I thought my lifesaver here. Hoping bad timing.
okay,
All right, Ezra Holding Joint Fiscal Office. Let me see if I have the Zoom link here. It's not showing right now, so let me try it. There we go.
That's right. These gonna be slides that we looked at already, like yesterday or the day before,
I'm gonna,
or they knew.
we got a new one.
Okay.
yeah, yesterday we made a decision about the CTE and one as a placeholder, just so there was a weight in there. And that changes the base.
We made, who's we?
Because
We didn't talk about that in
yes, we did. CTE, didn't we? Talk about it, what, maybe we didn't.
No, that,
Okay,
I had put on the table a proposal to have a report back with an analysis of what a CTE weight should be.
Right.
So I think it's important that we distinguish who's making decisions where and when.
and can we? You send that?
Yes.
Okay,
Can I go ahead and post it to the? Silent.
yes, what did we post it? That's your slides.
I have just shared
Okay.
all this with the committee.
Okay, yes, we could post it once it's being shared with the committee.
All right, yeah. We weren't sure if John was going to go first or not, so that's why.
Okay, I think John is still drafting.
Okay, yeah, so. All right, so just get the boilerplate out of the way, joint fiscal office, still non-partisan. Okay, so today condensed it down to really just focus on the, as requested, the H 454 as recommended by the Senate Committee on Education, and then as the chair mentioned, that same H 454 is recommended by Senate Education with the addition of a CTE weight.
I think Senator Beck, wasn't that your concern to get a CTE weight?
Well, I would like a CTE weight. I think that's a good place to look with it. My concern was without a CTE weight, the two CTEs over my way are the only two CTEs that can't accept their tuition. That was my concern. But if there's a CTE weight, then I no longer have that concern.
Okay, would this CTE weight allow them to charge anything?
No,
Yeah.
they would just, the money would just flow through to them just like all the other businesses.
But instead the weighted number.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the same way that goes for every other. Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. Yep.
Okay.
So how is this 1.0 CTE weight calculated?
That was a request.
So there's no data or any
Right.
empirical analysis behind this. This is just
So
pulled out of somebody's hat.
So I believe that this is the weight that was provided in the enhanced evidence-based model, and they, I believe, had offered a weight of 1.0 because as they increased the base number in their enhanced evidence-based model, they were then able to bring their proposed CTE weight down, and I believe they were targeting the number in approximation of the 25,000. When you combine your base and weight together, as well as leaving some money behind with the sending district, I believe. So that was, I believe, kind of the logic behind APA's 1.0 model. And part of this request that you have here is to utilize that 1.0 weight.
Okay. I mean, no criticism of you, you're just doing your job, but this is just a made up number that has no empirical basis behind it. they are guessing at this number, I'm estimating.
That's sort of why don't you walk through.
All right, so again, a lot of this is a repeat of what you all have seen from me before. So the models today are using the fiscal year 2025 education payment as what they're being solved for. And so this is what the Senate Committee on Education recommended. We were able to lower it down a little bit to get it below the Zoom box. So,
Oh,
yeah,
that's a job.
thank you. So what
Small victories.
small victories indeed. All right, so what Senate Education had recommended for their foundation formula was to take the FPL weight from the as passed by the House. That's where that 1.02 comes from. And they also had the modeling done with a single proxy EL weight. However, the language is that the tiered EL weights would be the ones that went into practice if this was what was passed. And if you recall, we had to do the single proxy weight that Dr. Colby provided because of data suppression. It was rounded up to 1.4 to, as requested, align with the APA number of 1.4 in the administration's proposal. And also there are some grade weights. Grades 6 through 8 get a 0.02 and grades 9 through 12 get a 0.1 weight. And in this model, there is a small school weight for schools under 100. However, it's required that the school be located in a district with fewer than 55 people per square land mile to be eligible to receive that weight. But there is no sparsity weight and there is no CTE weight. You just have a sparsity check to ensure your small school can receive the small school weight. So with all these weights in place, we were then instructed to solve for the current education payment in fiscal year 2025 of 1.88 billion. And that's where the base of 14,870 came from. So that was what was recommended by Senate Committee on Education. So the latest modeling request that I was given for today was to do the same. However, we now have a CTE incorporated in there. So you'll see you have the same FPL, the same EL, and small school weights. Still no sparsity, but you'll notice that there's now a CTE weight of the 1.0, as previously mentioned. And because the methodology for this foundation formula was to hold it at 1.88 for an education payment, by adding in that 1.0 weight, all of these additional weighted students, we then, to keep the payment the same, had to lower the base. So you'll see that the base didn't quite make it under that Zoom cost. But the base is 14,541. And the total long-term weighted ADMs generated here is a little bit over 129,000. So again, using this methodology, you would have a EOP or education payment that is approximately the same as what was spent in fiscal year 2025 with the addition of a CTE weight. I will note that the CTE FTE figure that we use for our modeling is the same that was utilized by the administration's proposal. So if a different CTE FTE number was used in the future or what have you, estimates would change because of that. So just want to note that. And these are the same further considerations you all have seen. That's really the this is really the only new slide I have for you all here today.
So, committee questions. I think what we're doing here is we're balancing between the two goals. The goal to provide a good education, and I think Tammy Colby's numbers told us what we would need to be spending now to provide that good education. We saw that some of our schools are spending significantly more and some of them are spending significantly less. And that if we put that into action today, that there would be some major tax rate changes. However, we are not putting anything into action today. We are not putting it in for our 2 to 3 years. We haven't decided that yet. When we will have moved further in deciding what our districts are gonna look like, what our school configuration is going to look like. And so we won't know till we get there. This looks at what we're currently spending and it's the other goal, which is to reduce spending. This says in the future state, we don't want to spend more than we're spending now. So whatever the inflationary pressures are between now and then, we will have to find a way to reduce costs, meet that. I think I've got that correctly. So none of these numbers mean this is what we're going to do this year or next year. All right.
Thank you, Senator Summing. Just wanted to add a few comments on this particular model. One, I like the tiered modeling of the EL weights. I can't necessarily speak to whether those amounts are correct, but I do like that tiered model. In terms of like our attempt to try to lower spending, I really liked the notion of a small school being a categorical grant. I think if our goal is to get to a place where our schools are all functioning at capacity and we have scale across the state, it would be nice to be able to direct those dollars where we see a school is small by necessity and not by design. So I like the categorical grant for small schools, and that obviously is not the case in this model. We've also been told by the one of the experts that we rely on that there's no longer a need for a middle and a high school weight. So I'm questioning that. Again, that seems like if our goal is to reduce spending, I'm seeing 3 weights right now that we perhaps don't need. And then I am concerned about the CTE and if it was really empirically derived or not. So I'm not getting the sense that it was, and if it was, I'd like to see how they got it.
I think that my understanding is that's a placeholder till we teach that. And it's an empirical drive.
Okay, I guess I'd love to see this come out of here as sort of tight and
We cannot do an empirically derived, we're somewhere between Colby and Picus. And we can't really, when we get ready to pull the trigger, then we're gonna have to look at the spending. We're gonna have to look at where we are, and we're gonna have to recalculate all of these. We're gonna have to recalculate a lot of them when we get to districts. This is just a huge chunk of work we did off this year. And we're not gonna be able to read it all. Senator Brock, would you? No, that.
So-
Did you, I thought you were, say something.
Well, I would just say I could live with these, I could live with this construct. I think it hits all the boxes I'm thinking of. I share some of Senator Kulik's comments on the small schools. While I said I could live with this, think I could live better with a variation of what Tammy Colby submitted on January 30th. And I'm more than happy to share those numbers if.
Yeah, if you've got
Okay, I'll send you the link to what she did, but
can you just share it
well,
or send it to?
maybe Ezra can share it. Can you share this link to, Tammy Colby's January 30 testimony?
But I mean, she said those were really
I
valid.
just don't have sure.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Nothing is going to be valid 3 years. from
I did send it to you in the email if you want to forward that number. I think the numbers are on page 17.
All right.
There we go. Okay. All right, so
now. Close up a little bit.
yeah, this was Professor Colby's work that she submitted to House Ways and Means on, or Senate Education on 130, I can't remember which, maybe both. And so these, what I would propose we do is we accept these weights with two changes. One I think could be considered empirical is the secondary weight of their 0.25, which I believe is high. The Agency of Education's allowable tuition report indicates that that number is more like 0.12, about half of what is in this study. And I'd also throw in the 1.0 CTE as a placeholder. And when that occurs, so when you change the 1.25 to 1.12, and you put in the CTE and keep everything else the same, JFO's preliminary calculation, they aren't checking it to make sure. Right now, the base would be 15,220. And I think that would be a really good, I think to some degree, it solves our sparsity conversation because we're giving some significant support to small schools there. I think the poverty rate of 0.75 is still really high. We're not backing off of our support for our English language learners. And I think that the evidence from AOA indicates that 0.12 is the correct number in 2024 for a secondary student. But I could live with what we had previous, but I think this is.
Well, what I want to know is, Ezra, have you been able to calculate that and put it in the form we've been looking at?
So, no, Chair, it's still preliminary, so we don't have any, reformatted tables or anything. So we're still working to vet that number and get it buttoned down. So we're still working.
Ask how long it might take.
We'll need to confirm the number.
You'll have to confirm.
That's a preliminary estimate. It hasn't been confirmed. We're not ready to talk about that estimate publicly.
Okay,
So if that's a direction that you'd like JFO to work on, we can do that, but JFO is not coming to these
Okay.
countries.
so you're not gonna be able to do it this afternoon. So that is something we could get in time for conference if someone wanted to adjust.
Or maybe for Florida.
Or maybe if you make more amendments if that comes. Okay. Okay,
Like I said, I can live with what was up there before.
with what we just said, right?
So, Madam Chair, I think it's really important to remember that Professor Colby came in and explained that these numbers were used as a example. And these are numbers based on data that is 6 years old and just inflated up.
Yeah, she
And
said
these
she
are not-
updated her, if she took her numbers from 6 years ago and updated them, that's what she'd come out with when she ran them through her program or algorithm, she came up with the ones that are in the house.
Right, she used updated data, 6 years of updated data, and she reran her, it's not an algorithm, it's
Whatever it is.
it's a, statistical modeling, regression analysis. And this was merely just inflating numbers from 6 years ago to come up with this, and it's not accurate, and I think it's really problematic to use a researcher's numbers that she herself has said, these are not the numbers that she stands by. I mean, I think it's problematic to use the other numbers that are under discussion right now because they are just picked and choosed and aren't based on anything. So either way, they're problematic, but yeah, either way, they're incredibly problematic and not empirically based. And
Okay. I think all of the numbers right now are problematic. So I'm gonna need a straw poll here. Who is comfortable going with the numbers as we just gave, which are the basic numbers calculated from what we're spending now with the CT placeholder in there that will move us forward into the future when we can recalculate everything when we have a new reality. I need to see a show of thought.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Will there be language that will spell out that this will all be renegotiated and recalculated in a future date, in future states?
You can put that in.
Okay, because that's really important.
Yeah.
Do you want me to respond?
Yeah.
John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. The language that we do have has for the CTE weight specifically a contingency. So it's contingent upon basically the assumptions behind the weight being in place before that weight would be rolled out. So you have something that supports the actual weight.
But it's language that's specific to CTE and not any of the other weights.
It's not specific to the others. The others roll out July 1, 2027, but for the CTE weight, there's a specific contingent implementation of that piece.
And we have not made a hard decision about when these roll out. They can roll out, we talked about 28, but, I'm still looking for thumbs.
Yeah, before the thumbs, I just wanted to say, and I am going to try to talk a lot less today, take up less space, but I will say we have been so focused on how the money comes in. We now today are starting to talk about how the money is going out, which is what Senate Ed really dove into. So this is not what we've been spending time on in Senate Finance. So I'm feeling really unprepared to fully vet these weights as they currently are. But where I'm coming to is I trust what John just said, that there's a contingency in place and that there will be further discussions. To your point, Madam Chair, I'm increasingly uncomfortable with FY28. I keep thinking FY29 is going to be the time that this should go into place. So there's a lot more of these things worked out before it gets implemented. I just hope, I'm not trying to weaken our position, but if it does go to community conference, I hope we ultimately land on the FY29 implementation if this thing takes it across the finish line.
Right now, the Senate is calling for 27, and I think the administration's proposal is it will be school year 20. No,
July 1st, 27, so
FY28, it's 27.
Yeah,
they have to make their budgets in 27,
Right.
based on the new council's budgets.
Basically, where are we on which set of numbers and weights we're going to use? We need to see who is comfortable with the Senate Ed numbers with that CTE holder weight in there. Are we comfortable with that? We've got to decide this. And if you're not comfortable with that, what are you comfortable?
I'm comfortable with that. I'm more comfortable with this.
Okay, but we're not gonna get that calculated.
Okay, I mean, I'm willing to do thumbs up or thumbs down based on, either of them.
Okay.
So,
But let me go to Senator Broad.
I am more comfortable with this than I am with anything else. To say I'm not comfortable with anything that you talked about. As far as
Okay. So this be not what's on the screen necessarily, but the Ezra, the last screen, Ezra, maybe you can put up.
Chair, would you like me to go back to the
Yeah.
other screen?
Thank you. We'll have on the screen what we're talking about. Okay,
Yeah, that could be confusing.
Is it safe to assume that should we adjust these weights, which are about the money going out to the schools, Senate Education will of course be consulted between now and then, and there will be a consideration of this. Because this is what they sent us, these
this
adjustments.
is what they set up.
I'm about as comfortable with these as I were with the other ones, and say that, so.
I'm gonna take that as a yes. Think Senator Maddox.
Yes to what Scott and Tom were saying. The other thing I just want to make sure about is the on-ramp, off-ramp of if we have that supplemental, that those districts that are spending less right now don't get mandated into immediately having to spend more, and if we have that supplemental one way or another. But
We have
to get to that point,
we have on and off ramp is on the list for today. I think we've agreed that we're gonna do one, the details we haven't gone through. Okay, so where are we? We are Senate Ed. Okay. That's committee discussion. We're definitely having that. We need to talk about timing next. John started us with that. I think we're done with Ezra for now.
Do we get asked, or do I get asked?
Well,
Or you
Well, you've already said no.
Okay, just want to make sure you got my,
I've got that.
got it.
All right.
Which did you all decide? I mean,
That's,
that's what the highest bid, this was the highest bidder.
Yep.
I love making education policy based on a bidding war. It's so comfortable for me, who spent my entire career working on education policy.
Might I propose that if these weights about money going out to schools are to be changed, that it comes from a floor member from Senate Education?
I,
No, we need this.
if anything
forward.
is going to happen, it will happen in the committee of conference.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
everything is on the table when you get there, all the parties, the House, the Senate. Senate Education, House Education. Everybody will be represented and everyone will go through this process of witnesses and rehashing all of
right now, we're going with the Senate Education basically.
it. And smile,
Oh, we don't,
Dan, we've got the enhanced number.
plus
Charts
CT.
didn't work out when joint fiscal looked into them. There were issues.
Okay.
Things that were not in there. Okay, so that's our placeholder actually for now, because we don't have time. Timing. John, you want to come up? What?
Sure.
I know we had the discussion on timing. There was 27, 28, 29, and 30 on the floor, I think.
So, John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I think this is mainly a topic for discussion. The draft that is posted assumes the Senate education timeline, which is still that FY 28. Yeah.
There they are. I don't think I've seen one. Okay, so this says foundation formula goes in July 1st, 2027, which means that's what they will do their budgets on this year, for the 28 school year.
You have, the December 1 letter will be updated July 1, 2026 to reflect the, trying to get information that you need for this direction, so people will be assembling their budgets. And then in FY 28, so July 1, 2027, folks would be moving on to that, meaning they would prepare their budgets on that basis. So it's going to be especially.
All right. I'm looking for comments, thumbs up, thumbs down. We talked about moving it to 28 because it is a lot, considering that we will be back here in 26. So anything we do next year in the way of updates or changes won't hit until July 26. That gives schools only 1 year to adjust, and it gives us only 1 year to adjust. And is that, I think it's a short time frame.
Well, FY 28 is, 2 budget cycles away. But there's a ramp. And I think in any scenario, there's a ramp for the districts to get.
We have a ramp right now for yes, they would.
Yeah.
For the funding going down if you get.
Right.
Going up.
And I think we're gonna have a supplemental if districts need that to help them get.
Supplemental spending, all right.
So I'm comfortable with FY 28.
It goes, FY 28, but have the foundation formula go into effect on July 1st, 27?
Right, for FY 28.
And I kind of follow along with that just because of the on ramps that we have and off ramps that we have in place, and then also the addition of the supplemental supplemental spending discussion. I think we're gonna have later about can they spend below or above. But definitely with the on ramp, off the ramp that we have in 0.5. Right, those are the numbers.
Yeah, it's a 4-year full transition.
Right, exactly.
That's what it
I've got 3 yeses.
So what I'll say, and I'd love to know your feeling on this too, Madam Chair, of course, but this is where I am in general on this right now. So I'm probably gonna vote this thing out, and I remember in Senator Rock, if I may, we served together last night. I remember there were at least 2 times where you voted yes in committee and then no on the floor. That's where I'm kind of landing right now, is I'm probably gonna vote yes to get this bill out. Because I don't want this conversation to stop, and we need the education transformation plan to move forward. But if FY 28 is what I have to ultimately vote on, I don't think I'll be there, if that makes sense. I just think FY 28 is way too much pressure. And I want the voters to weigh in, because I have fundamental concerns about what we're doing and what we're gravitating towards. And I want the next election cycle to allow the voters to be heard. So that's where I am. So I can go with FY 28 here in committee, but it might be a major stumbling block for me when it comes to the final bill.
So that's a yes.
Sure. Sorry, I mean, talking about it, struggling today with this.
Okay, Senator Hardy, date that we kick in the foundation for.
Thank you for asking, Madam Chair. I think that the House's timeline is a reasonable and well thought out timeline. I put an option on the table yesterday for FY 29 that I could live with. But FY 28, I agree with Senator Chittenden. It's crazy and cruel to our education system.
What are my options?
Right now, the proposal is that it go
Senate Ed has FY 28 as an implementation.
FY 28, the foundation formula would go into effect on July 1st, 2027. So it would be the 2028 school year that gets, I think they're still voting in March, and we have to mess with that.
So the options are 28 or 29 school year.
It's the option. Right now, the question is, do you support the 28 school year? Because that's what's in the bill.
I'm guessing you do not.
That's what's in the Senate Education. Bill.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I do not.
Okay. And I'm gonna vote no, because I think it is too short a timeline, but I've got 4-3. So for now, we are at 2027.
For FY 28.
It was FY 28, but it goes in January 1st. Okay.
And just to measure comfort levels, we've had a vote, so we know what we're going to do.
Right.
But in terms of comfort levels of where the members are right now, looking at, we know where the 28 is. Where's the 29? Where's the 30? And where's the not at all?
Okay.
Just curious.
I can't recall being this uncomfortable in my recent history, if that helps you at all. I'm extremely uncomfortable with all of this.
Good with it.
I think everybody is extremely uncomfortable
The
with
question
all of
is, how uncomfortable you are at the prospect of these changes versus doing nothing at all. And
Very much
continuing
so.
as we're going.
Very much so.
Yeah, I mean,
Very
and
much so.
think I will be more worried if we are all equally uncomfortable a year from now when we have the districts, when we have more data, and when we've been through it. And once we have more, we can move it forward or we can pull the plug. This is moving the discussion forward to move to a foundation formula. And then we're trying to find a way to work out the details. This is new and uncharted territory. And I would be worried if we were comfortable. It's, but remember, I said today, I only yelled at staff a year ago as we were looking at an 18% property tax increase. And we were not able to find a way to get it down, and the pain out in the populace was unbearable for many people. It was still unbearable for many people, even once we bought it down 4 to 5%. And we're buying down another 5% today. So if we do nothing, we're back there spending the most per student in the country. And we aren't that wealthy and we don't have that big a tax base, so.
And I was just gonna say, that's where I'm comfortable with FY 28. I get more uncomfortable further we go down the calendar, because I'm just thinking about how much general fund money we're gonna have to come up with.
I think I can almost guarantee we are not going to have.
Yeah.
We just lost up to $10 million in internet funding.
On that.
Yeah. Just go on.
Just for clarity, the House had this implemented FY 30.
Yep.
That's correct? Correct.
Yeah.
And so Senate Ed FY 28, we're concurring with FY 28. In committee conference, I really hope we land in the middle.
We'll probably land it, but they could. Yeah. Okay. So we're uncomfortable, but we're there. We've got the transition, which is the ramping up and ramping down. We have language in the bill for ramping up and down, spend money coming or going from schools. So no school will get a whole lot of money at once. And no school will lose a whole lot of money at once. There will be a ramping process. Do we have language? I know there's language in the bill to the ramping of the money. Do we have language for ramping of the tax rates? That was the other thing.
Yep, so we now have transition language for tax rates, and you would then remove the ramping of the payments, because what you really are doing are easing the burden right onto folks, and they're still entitled to the payments that they want.
So if we ramp the tax rates,
I can show you if it's
okay,
helpful.
yeah, show us how that works.
It's on the website now.
It is posted under my name.
That's all.
I'm going to put you on page notes. Okay. I am on page 87 of draft 1.1, original strike one. This is your full amendment, right? I think that includes all the pieces. So strike whole amendment. Your tax rate transition, it's going to look very familiar because it's the same mechanics that were used for the on ramping and off ramping of the payments. But this is a longer time period, right? So across fiscal years 28, 29, 30, and 31 with fully transitioned in fiscal year 32, your homestead property tax rate would equal what would be calculated under 5402, so that uniform homestead property tax rate. And then you would receive a yearly adjustment, and it would be incrementally moving you in fits, right, toward the agreement. So this would work toward that uniform homestead, right? So it would work in both directions. If you're, and let me just call out what the gap is, right? It's the amount that results from subtracting your uniform homestead property tax rate for that FY28 when you're rolling out the provision. If it were calculated, assuming no tax transition, so fully functioned, so doing it as you would if you didn't have a transition mechanism in place, you're subtracting that figure from the homestead property tax rate that was in place in the school district in FY27. What it gives you is a gap between where you are in FY27 directly before foundation formula rollout and the tax rate that would be in place in 28. And if you're below, you're going to be moved upward toward the FY28 figure. And if you're above, it's going to move you downward toward that figure. The one thing I would call out here is this is a fixed, it's a historical determination, right? The transitional gap is between FY28 and FY27. It is not a calculation that you do each year. It's just the first year. Exactly. And so what it would give you is a cent amount, and each year you would move whatever that cent amount is, accounting for a fifth of the gap between where you are and where you're meant to be under the new system.
So is it kind of like the Act 127 transition that we did?
Yeah, I think I struggled to call out any particular sense just because we're not pinning, you know, you could arbitrarily say we're going to do a cent for this particular piece, right? This is actually measuring a specific gap, but it is literally that across this period, you would receive in each year a discount or a penalty of that fifth amount.
Okay, but it would, yes, but it's calculated for each cap.
Yes, it's calculated for each school district.
Okay,
Each school district.
Senator Hardy.
So, John, did I hear you say that the bill includes a tax rate transition, but it no longer includes the foundation formula amount transition?
Right, you would just receive the foundation. The idea is that you're fully funding whatever the base times weighted long-term membership or educational opportunity payment. And fiscal year 28, everyone will receive the EOP that they received under this.
So based on the construct that's in the bill right now, with the committee of 8 legislators coming up with a map that has to be voted on next January, it's highly unlikely that we're going to have new districts. And so the current districts would have to weather new payments And for some of them, that's an enormous increase or an enormous decrease. And they just get it all at one time. You don't care about school districts and how they're going to manage and pay their bills.
Yeah, I think if you're identifying that you're off the foundation formula and you're on the foundation formula, that's correct. The easing that this proposes is to the tax burden that folks bear.
So all of my districts in Addison County will receive a lot less money, and it'll happen like that. And there'll be no ability for them to adjust. It's just in one year, they might have a 16-20% decrease in funding, and then they'll just have to deal.
That's what I have here.
Okay, thanks, John.
If they're still in the same form, but that's part of the problem with the 27, not me. So. Then the fact I'm watching you calculate.
Well, I'm trying to get to the language here and I'm trying to get my head around the idea as well.
Page 87.
Okay, can you, draft 1.1?
Yep.
Yeah. This.
And just to offer, the way that it would work is you would be calculating the rates right to fully fund what you need to fund to cover all of the EOPs, and you're providing a discount, penalty depending on the side that you fall on, based on this transition gap.
Well, this installs individual sticker shock on their tax bill.
Yeah, this is
There'll
about.
be some-
Yes.
There'll be shock up or down. It doesn't solve the problem with asking schools, and in this case, some schools will get more, and they may not be prepared to spend that more, and others will get significantly less. And given the short time frame in here,
Let's just maybe use a couple numbers. So let's say the district in the year before had a tax rate of $1.50. And then in the next year, they're a high spender and their tax rate was calculated at $2.
Sure.
So that's your transaction gap of 50 cents there.
Yep.
So what rate would they pay?
So I can't say what rate they would pay, because what you're having to do is determine first the uniform homestead rate, absent the assumptions about the transition mechanism. So you're coming up with that rate to provide sufficient fund, right? The rates are set, both the uniform homestead.
Everybody's gonna get 100%.
Exactly. It's a uniform,
Okay.
it's a uniform homestead, uniform non-homestead.
Okay,
That is determined sufficient to cover whatever the expenditures in that year are. And then once that rate is determined, they receive a discount or a penalty based on the gap identified. So it's not telling them it's going to be $1.50, then it's going to be $1.60, then it's going to be $1.70 until you get to $2. You have a fixed gap, and you're moving in an increment of 10 cents for this. You're receiving a 10% penalty or discount based on where you fall relative to it. But it's reliant on what the uniform rate is, because you are raising the funds to cover the expenditures from the ed fund. So it's not changing what people receive. It's just trying to ease the transition of the, exactly.
Okay.
I realize it does feel weird because it isn't that $1.50 to $1.60 to $1.70.
Yeah.
You won't know at the start of this.
Not a penny.
Right.
And is JFO confident that they can do it that way? I suppose that.
Sure. Julie Rector, Joint Fiscal Office. Yeah, I mean, this would be similar to the other spend discounts that have been modeled and implemented. For instance, the updated Act of 27 mechanism. It's a little bit different because it's going up and going down. But to John's point, essentially what we would be doing in tax and JFO and AOE, the whole team would be calculating if there were no penny discounts, what would the uniform homestead rate be required to fully fund the education fund, right? And then we would say, so that would be the uniform homestead rate in FY 2028. And then we look at what would be the school district's rates in FY 27, and we calculate the difference. So for in Senator Beck's example, that would be 50 cents. And then using the percentages here, we would then calculate for fiscal year 28, the penny discount would be 50 cents times 0.8. In fiscal year 29, the cent discount or increase would be 50 cents times 0.6, so on and so forth. And then after we calculate all of those discounts or increases to phase in district's tax rates, then we would need to recalculate what the uniform homestead rate would be required to sufficiently fund all of the penny discounts that were
Sure,
included.
of course, yeah.
Okay,
Okay, I think I understand it.
yeah, that helps.
Okay.
And that is how we phased things in before.
If I may, I know that this committee has talked a little bit about percentages and tax rate percentages. One of the challenges that you'll keep in mind is that the education fund's flexible revenue, flexible lever to ensure that Ed fund is fully funded is with our property taxes, right? So by considering some sort of amorphous percentage in the future, that's going to depend on performance of non-property tax revenues, other appropriations out of the education fund. So this is a way to set it ahead of time so that we don't get into the cyclical nature of some of the Ed fund modeling we've been talking about this session.
Okay, so if revenues come in ahead of forecast, there would probably be less of it. Yeah,
It'll be the same penny discounts
right.
regardless of how revenues come in FY 2030. Because they will have already been determined in the beginning of the transition period.
Okay,
I wonder if there would be a different approach might be to let the district control how much they want to pay. And kind of control their own transition that way.
What do you mean?
Like the district is, let's say in a low spending district, for example, it's looking, if they would say, we, first year, we want to take 85% of the EOP. Maybe they're a really low spender.
We don't have districts. We don't know who's gonna be a low spender.
We have districts, right?
we have that now.
Right now we do, but
Sure, we have districts, right?
not in our future.
What about on the other side, where do they get to decide, oh, actually I want 120%, I want 150%?
Well-
You're underfunding the foundation
I
formula.
think you're talking about below right now, that they would control, they said, we'll take, let's say it's Slate Valley. They're 85%. And they say, hey, we're gonna take 85% this year. Their tax rate's 85% of the statewide rate.
Just keep doing what we're doing.
What?
Then we should just keep doing what we're doing, because I mean, that,
No.
on the other end, to keep it fair.
I'm just wondering if the tax department or whoever would do that having to have every town say, I'm gonna take 22%, I'm gonna take
So it's not,
53%, and
Why are you gonna be a floor?
it's not connected to the spending. It's not connected to the spending, then who's gonna vote for higher taxes? And what we have now is how that's connected to the spending. So I mean, what you're imagining is fairly employed the way we currently have it.
now this is just
Fair point.
saying,
No.
to get into this new, we know.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
And we won't know until we get to the future state what we're gonna end up with for base and weights. But we don't know what that tax rate is gonna look like. Our goal is that it's going to be less than it is now, and as we build and go through our consolidation, at least at the upper levels, the goal is that it will continue to go down. But we've got people that are, we have districts that are high spending according to what the calculation is now on the Colby model. If we all spent what the model says is necessary. So we've got it, we're trying to find a way to get everybody to the same level, which means we've got to walk some down and some up.
Which no, this does that.
This is one way to do it.
But if you're starting to give them choices on spending, you got
I,
tax rates, it's gotta be connected.
I think that would be very hard to put into the tax department's computer.
Well, there's a way.
It'd be very hard to explain.
Yes,
It would require lowering the base to 85% and allowing you to vote on the 15%.
no, we're still gonna go with the,
That's how you would.
this is completely apart from above base spending. This is how you walk them down and walk them up into spending,
Yeah, agree.
okay? We also, when we get there, can look at revenue. All right? We also, when we get there, can look at, you know, what are, they can spend above base if they choose to do that. And
But they can't spend below.
It has to be lower the base.
not below the base,
Nobody can spend below 100% of this.
right?
So is that the base?
Foundation formula.
Yeah,
It's the foundation.
I think if you could show to the Department of Ed that you could do that and produce what they define as an adequate education or good education,
Right.
then we should know about that and start to do it. But just say as a matter of, you know, just a matter of, it's your choice, no, that we just stick with what we've got. If that's what you want.
Right, but it doesn't seem like there's any, if there's a district out there that says, you know, maybe they're really efficient, maybe they got great leadership. If they can produce the same results for 95% of the EOP.
Then we'll have to have a talk with them and find out what they do.
Okay,
I mean, that's,
but in this contract, they will just get 100%.
no, they would not get 90, they
They
would,
would get 100.
everybody gets the
Okay.
EOP, which is the base plus the waste time, your weighted student population.
Okay.
Okay,
I just want to make sure I understand the construct. Okay.
yes,
Okay.
this is the new foundation formula. Okay. So can we live with John's weight?
The transition.
For now, we're gonna have to go in and deal with.
But just to be clear, these are not John's. He just did what he was told. So who was the one who gave him this drafting instruction?
I mean, I'm sure.
Yes,
So to that, I recall, we were talking about this on Monday, because I mentioned how I wanted to mirror this rate. I think we're all here, mirror some transition mechanism to what Senate Ed did with the money going out. That was my question.
Yes.
Because I believe Senate Ed has 0.75, 0.5, and 0.25, and we're doing 0.8, 0.6, 0.4, and 0.2. Is there a rationale to have one on a 5-year timeline and the other one on a 4?
So. Got chocolate on my mouth, but,
Trying to cue up my question.
No, that's great. There's no reason as to, you could have reasons, right, for doing a 3 or 5 year. I do just want to be clear, we don't have that payment transition in here, but you could do both if you wanted to, right? You could have both, and if you did that, you would probably put them on the same timeline. So you could do 5-year payment transition, you're moving people up or down to the payment.
This replaced the
Yep.
payment transition for the amount that
Right.
school districts get.
Exactly.
And so there's only a transition for tax It's not a transition for budgets.
So we could do a transition to the budget at the same time.
You could do both.
I thought we were doing both.
It's possible I misunderstood what
I-
you requested.
I thought
That's
we
what
were.
that's what I was saying
Okay.
before.
Okay.
And no one listened to me, so,
I'm listening.
you know, I'm just saying, I mentioned this before, this was replacing it, I asked John that
Yes.
specifically earlier.
Yes,
It's.
Did say that.
I have no intention of replacing, because we want to do both. We want to ramp up the spending, the money the districts get and lose, and we want to ramp the tax rates, the amount taxpayers are paying and not paying.
It was the one thing I liked in that bill.
Exactly.
We're after
It's the
both.
only thing they did correctly.
Am I right? That's where the committee is? I think we should mirror the same.
I can put that in.
Okay.
Same
That's in
timeline.
now, so we'll just
Now, would you need,
pick up the strike.
would you need both if you ramp the funding, wouldn't that align with your tax rate?
It doesn't change the way that the rates are calculated are to funds, right? It's easy to think, oh, you're getting a discounted rate, so we're literally raising less revenues for those who are discounting, and for those above, we're raising more than they would have, right?
Yeah.
But the way that it works is you're calculating the tax for the expenditures that you set, and so you're choosing what are the expenditures you want to fund. The expenditures here are just everyone at the 100% of EOP, right? And then if you did a transition where you said, I want to move people down to their EOP or up to their EOP, depending on where they stand relative to FY25, it would be a different figure as to what that expenditure is, but you would still calculate the rate to determine what is sufficient to raise the expense.
So you can do both without it being a major.
We need to raise the. Am I not thinking about this right? We need both, right?
Well, is it mathematically possible
It's
to
a
do
policy
this
decision.
without breaking the ed fund?
It's a policy decision. Yes, I think so, right? One is talking about a transition of spending,
Money going out to the schools.
the money going out to the schools. The other is talking about a transition in funding,
Okay.
which is the tax rates. And so to John's point, essentially what first we would be looking at the spending transition. And we would be looking at how much money is going out to schools. What are the other obligations on the education fund? How are non-property revenues doing? We'd have that whole picture. And then we would say, now what about the tax rate transition? So, right, unless we'll continue to think about it, but I do not see an issue of having both transition mechanisms. That's just a policy decision.
It just seems to me that if you're, this is 100%, this is where they are. And if in the first year they get that much, if we're transitioning them in, if you just tax them on how much they're receiving, then it just kind of takes care of it. Is that what you're-
Well, yeah, it's what I'm thinking, but we have a uniform right now, it's not
It's a step.
the current
With
current
that,
method, so you have to discount the tax rate, right, John?
The way to think about it is you're raising the funds statewide still. So the fact that someone has a discounted rate and they're receiving it, they have lower expenditures, doesn't mean that they align, right? They're not raising the entirety of the revenue for that purpose. So it is right. You're choosing what is the expenditure you're funding. And then you're applying a discount or a penalty to the tax rate sufficient to raise whatever expenditure you choose to have, which could be the ramp or up or down.
I think that part of what is confusing the discussion a little bit is two different transition mechanisms are being talked about simultaneously, or maybe rather three, right? One is stepping the education opportunity payments in and stepping in the tax rates. Another is, are you combining how much a district, are you stepping in tax rates in accordance with how much a district is receiving? And those are two distinct ways of transitioning, right? One is looking at the transition gap that John has been talking about and stepping in. Another way is by looking at what a district is receiving and then calculating a ratio of their rate based off of how much they're receiving. So there's two different transition mechanisms.
Okay, the rate would be on what they're receiving, so that would ramp their rate if we.
So if a district were to decide to spend, and I know that this is an outstanding discussion point, if a district were to have 90% of their education opportunity payment van, would their uniform tax rate be adjusted? By that, would their uniform tax rate be 90%? That would be That's the other transition mechanism being discussed.
Okay. Aren't we, let me just ask you, aren't we contemplating what's in the Senate Ed bill? And if so, did you all do some modeling of that, or what were the discussions? Because I thought that's what we were talking about, was what Senate Ed had in their bill.
So Senate Ed, yes, had the education opportunity payment transition. And now we're talking about the tax rate transition, and I'm hearing the conversation combining the two in some instances and separating the two in other instances. So I'm just saying, you could have both, you could have one. These are all policy decisions. Did that answer your question?
What was in the Senate Ed bill? Both.
So Senate Ed did not transition tax rate.
Okay.
It just.
One thing that
Just
you not get.
It transitioned the education opportunity payment with that transition gap of step downs and step up.
Okay, so it was,
Why I raised this is my concern was with just the education transition, stepping that in, not touching the tax rate is, in my mind, I imagine a world where it's FY 28. That next year, it's gonna ratchet up and down the amount that each district's getting, but that same year, CVU's tax rate is gonna go down 14% and Slate Valley is gonna go up 34% overnight. So that's what I thought would happen absent this transition mechanism. And
You can do both. I think that's nice, but
now with this transition mechanism on both sides, because just doing the spending wouldn't naturally ratchet.
exactly. If
Okay,
you just
so you
did the
need both.
spending, everyone's paying the uniform
You need
rates,
both.
right?
okay, my hearing, we would like to do both.
Yes. Sorry.
All right.
So,
All right, I got two for both.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because on both ends, I wouldn't want Addison County to lose all their money
Overnight.
right,
overnight. Even though they would have a lower tax rate, I would not want that funding just to
okay,
go away.
so we're going to phase
And vice versa.
the ups and the downs. If you get too much money, it's gonna take a while to hire people and figure out what you need to do to provide more education. If we suddenly give you a lot of money, you might not spend it.
I don't think
That
for the
one.
capital reserve account, we need that.
Okay, so I'm hearing Senator Brock, Senator Hardy, Senator Kulik, glad to hear from you guys. This is both or one or the other?
I'm a strong both.
Yeah, I'm going. I'm
Okay,
gonna look at that too.
I'm for both.
I'm still kind of at a loss for words, but yes, I'll vote.
Okay. Both, all right,
Are you comfortable with 5 years? That's the, just,
5 versus 4. So Senate Ed did 4, and you came up to 5.
yeah,
given the gaps, 5 is,
Yeah, I think 5 is reasonable.
okay. All right, oh, one more decision. All right. That gets us to supplemental district. We still have base and weights. We're going with Ezra's, all right, we're going with Ezra's. Okay, I have that, I've got 2 places. I can put that base and weights. All right, then we have supplemental district spending. Yes or no? That's the first question.
Trying to talk last, I'll say yes to what Senator Hardy suggested the other day about what that percentage amount would be based on, which would be just the.
So right now, I just need a yes.
Yes, I mean, yes.
Or no,
Yes, we'll talk about the details.
okay. Yes,
Yes, we'll talk about.
all right, Senator Hardy and Senator.
Yeah, just not.
I mean, my vote obviously doesn't matter. It's a no because we're not adequately funding our education system to begin with, so no.
No, and we aren't adequately funding it now. So. Okay, so we are going to allow supplemental spending. How much? 5, 10% have been thrown on the table. I believe. This.
10%.
Bill did 10, the
10%.
House did
10.
10, yeah. All right, are we set on 10?
I'm 10%, but I like the base, 10% base, not the weights, just the base, not the base. Yeah,
Like what's
Um,
already proposed.
Having trouble hearing. 10%
10%, but just 10% of the base, not the weights.
of the base that, yes, the
Yeah.
tax department yesterday
Yeah.
showed us how much additional that's spending,
Right.
and they wanted 5% of the butts in seat calculation, not the weighted pupils.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna do 10% of your average daily membership. 10%. You can spend
10% of your
10%
base
more
times your
of
average.
your base number based on your actual student count, not your weighted.
That's right,
student
that's right, yeah.
Okay,
I will just, and, you know, Senator Chittenden is crediting me with that, but I will just note that that was in a world where there was an adequate base and we don't have an adequate base. I still am comfortable with that. Given this construct, I just, you know, I'm against the entire construct, but with this tiny little piece of it, I think that's the way to go. However, I think that the way the House equalized it is a better construct. The House's mechanism for the yield and the
okay,
equalization.
we haven't
of
gotten
that.
to that yet. We're still,
Monday.
uh,
10% base.
still 10% on
Yeah.
the average daily membership. Wait, okay. Then we get to the House had a way to equalize. The,
I put forward a notion, but I like what the House did too. It's already written. It's fine with me.
okay, you had one,
I really don't like the way the House did it. I really like the way Senate did it. That, by using that lowest brandless district, I mean, there are gonna be districts above them that are gonna, you know, the current 119 that are gonna be like, I don't know, like 10 times. I mean, I think they're gonna pay a tremendous amount more than what they're actually gonna take. I really don't like the House equalization.
they're going on the lowest
Yeah, they're going to low.
valley.
Yeah,
The
I
lowest.
really am really
lowest
comfortable with
property
that.
rich district would pay.
Yeah,
Then, John, you said it would be very difficult to draft senator.
I don't know how difficult it would be. It just would take me time and I can't estimate. So if you want the voters today, I would factor that into your consideration.
We can do a floor amendment next week, but so
I would work with you on that.
there you
if you wanna do that.
go.
All right,
We keep the House language for now and we come back and talk. The Chittenden, for lack of a better term, the Chittenden approach for further consideration.
okay.
I would be amenable.
Can we put that in the draft? We call it.
It should-
That would be a approach.
Okay, so we are
I really
the
don't want
House
to.
of
So
in,
you get
But they-
credit or the blame there,
all
Tom.
right, we're gonna keep the House approach in there for now. Which is the lower, everybody would pay the same rate as the lowest property rich district. Okay, and with the caveat that we're gonna be working on drafting, taking the average or the median? The average,
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and make sure that the numbers work on that. Okay, and that can be brought on because it won't be on the floor, it'll be on notice on Tuesday.
Yeah, time.
So unless they take it off notice, which will depend on you guys.
If everybody's ready. we'll get back
Okay.
into
I don't know if I'm gonna be ready, but,
it.
okay. So we're gonna do the House version.
That's the language we just construct type of, right?
Yeah, and putting the extra money in the construction fund.
Okay,
That's different now.
That is a different decision point, is what you're saying.
Of what you do. with
Wait,
the
is it
extra.
different? What do you mean?
I haven't walked through 1.1, but there are things in here that presumably we will not see. One of them being that the money does not go to the school construction aid. special fund.
Who told you to do that? Or someone told you to do
I always
that?
thought that's what they did, but I don't really know.
Wait, I'm trying to keep track. What did, what's,
Do you want to stay on the track that you are on, or have a more free? I'm happy to answer questions people have, but I don't want to disrupt what you're trying to do.
Well, let's just decide right now whether, I don't think we've completely decided whether we're doing the house version and we're gonna work on a floor amendment. Have we made that decision?
we decided, I thought, this is for the supplemental
Yes.
spending, that we were going to go with the house formula pending the ability to get the Chittenden formula drafted. When that gets done, then that will, as per forma, get presented to the committee, at which point, because it'll be a floor amendment, at which point the committee will decide whether or not it supports that amendment.
And so now we just have to decide if that mechanism generates any addition. Where does it go to?
Where does
Bottom
it go
line?
to?
Just put it in there now and get it performance. Put in there.
You know, like the page drafted.
Okay, then where
Does it go?
will it go? House has it going to, but they are going to generate a lot more money than,
Design you generate.
yeah. Than if we do the Chittenden formula. So it will be going, they're putting it, there's a reserve, and then they're sending the rest to a fund they set up for school construction. Where we can keep that. We can send it somewhere else, or we can let it go to the bottom line of the ed fund
If we're silent, that's what happens.
and let it, if we're silent, I guess it would go to the bottom.
Which doesn't preclude it from going to bonding in the future.
I say we be silent.
Okay.
Just like, oh,
So wait, the House version has money going to a construction fund.
Yes.
Okay, and what am I hearing now? That's no longer happening?
Right now, the proposal is, because I think it depends on where we land. Right now, as Senator Beck, I've told everybody else, said we should, if we're silent and we don't say where that money goes, it will fall to the bottom line of the ed fund and it will impact next year's tax rate.
so we decided to do something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
That could be a lot of money. We can redirect it at any time. If we do Senator Chittenden's proposal in the end, if that's the one that ends up being chosen, there is a chance it won't raise enough money. It all depends on what the wealthier districts choose to raise, because if their overage that's funding the lower tax rich districts yet to be named, if the districts come out pretty balanced in tax, then everything's fine.
But you do understand, Madam Chair, that the mechanism in the bill right now, as it came to us from Senate Education, is very unlikely to result in new districts. So this all has to be assumed that this is going to be on our current districts.
What makes it unassumed that there's going to
8 legislators coming up with a map, one map that needs to be voted on in one,
well, we
in
haven't
an election
gotten
year.
there yet.
That is highly unlikely.
All right. Okay, but if in the end, we assume Senator Chittenden's proposal, which starts with everybody gets charged the rate of the average property rich town, value towns. It is going to generate less money. There's a slight risk it won't generate enough money, at which point it'll be a hit to the ed fund. But if it does overage, then where does the overage go?
It's a true fact. We can't bind the hands of future legislators. So we say it goes to the bonding fund or not, and whoever's here, probably not gonna be us. Sorry, that was a joke. But in January.
This bill, Senator Chinton.
On January 27th, that legislature could change whatever we do with this amount of money, however it might accumulate or not. So
Once
I like the bonding thing. I think that makes sense, and there's lots
Once we get more detail,
I'll put this.
all right, but there's no money, there's no way to raise the money for the state to take any share, and history says that no town has voted for a bond except Green and Chittenden County because they can't afford it. So we are going to have to help districts. We've got to find some money.
Let's just go.
So, and can I-
What's the house?
Yeah,
So how is it that underfunding the system and then allowing richer districts to raise more money, how does that not fly in the face of Brigham?
it remains to be seen if we are underfunding the districts. If we take Tammy Colby's numbers now, which would be fully funding it, that's what we should be spending now. We are therefore underfunding everything now. It causes panic to put that number out because when we get to the future state, which is a more consolidated school district, what we need to spend to do an adequate education should be less. That is one of the reasons that we're doing this. We won't be able to calculate that number until we get closer to there. Now, if it's going to be in 27, I highly doubt it. I think that whatever we do now will be not withstood more than once before we get to Valley High or wherever that ideal state is.
Wait, what did you say? Valley High?
Valley High, is South Pacific?
South Pacific. Oh, okay, thank you. I thought you said Valley High.
Yeah.
I thought it was Valley High.
The flight?
Valley High.
Musical.
Thank you so much, guys.
That's the one.
Okay, it's a game.
I'll watch it together.
Right.
Help us.
All right, so we are not putting any of these rates in under the present governance system. That's one of the caveats.
What rates, what do you mean?
The foundation rates, yeah.
Well, they're going into the law.
Yes,
Those
but the law
amounts.
can be not withstood at any point as we go forward. And the calculations say this, we can change them.
To move this conversation forward,
Yes.
might I propose that we stay with what the House has done with both the equalization ratio and how the money will be buried for that year and then put into a school construction fund as originally contemplated. And if we do a floor amendment regarding that, like a better term, Chittenden formula, if we want to reconsider it all, we could then. I personally would like to continue to have it go to a school construction fund because we need schools in this state. But we can have that conversation another day when this deadline's not pressing for me. Does that work for you,
Okay,
John?
so we're gonna keep it as is, anticipating that we will have a floor amendment, or we will have a proposal for a floor amendment. Okay. Okay, I've got that. What have I not gotten to?
I think One thing that Senator Hardy just kind of alluded to a little bit is that in FY 28, we're going to need at least a non-homestead rate,
Yes,
notwithstanding legislative action, but what should it be? I have thought maybe what we should do is say that the FY 28 non-homestead rate shall be whatever it was in FY 27, notwithstanding legislative action, and then the homestead rate that state would just go to whatever it needs to be to pay all the bills and fill the reserve. And as a starting point,
Yeah.
we got to start some.
that in as a,
Wait, so you would put in a non-homestead rate now, and then the homestead rate would move up or down to fill the fund?
Yes,
well, right now,
as a starting point, to start somewhere.
all right, what is the differential
Why?
right now? Does anyone know off the top of their head?
I know of one.
They'll know in 1 second. Okay, that's, I can wait.
I mean, while I'm pulling it up, the difference in now compared to the future state with the uniform homestead rate
Yeah.
and uniform non-homestead rate is under current law, all of the homestead property tax rates vary by school district.
Yeah.
Right? So under current law, you all just set, it said to the governor, yield bill, which would have an average homestead property tax rate of $1.595. That's average, so that's not
Right.
uniform, and a non-homestead rate of $1.703.
Okay.
So about 11 cents higher. We could not.
Put that in just to what, this is this is a lever we haven't pulled yet. We have always done a higher rate for non-homestead. We've asked the tax department, there's a proposal to divide it out into 3 different groups. We've asked the tax department to look at that, to tell us what we do with multiple use things. And what the income would look like if we chose to do a differential rate.
Right.
With any of these, and then we can do the same, they'll all move at the same,
Then they'll all move going
Same
forward.
rate,
But
yeah.
We gotta start somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but we, that's what we asked the tax department to come back with. That's the other lever that's not being included in here.
So you don't want to set that in. this-
I don't- It's until they come back and tell us what we could set it as a placeholder, but it's not gonna have any relevance.
Yeah, it's just a starting point.
It's just starting.
Yeah, that's
point.
all it is.
I mean, right now we'll be silent on the tax rates
Right, so
until,
at some point we'll need to,
oh,
say, hey, this is
next year we.
starting.
Yes, next year we will set the tax rate. And we'll
Okay.
be able to look at the needs, and we will be able to look at different sectors and kind of balance.
Can I say something? I just want to share with the committee that I'm really uncomfortable with the amount of decisions that we are putting off to a future that is unknown, and also to a conference committee that obviously won't have all of our voices. I just think it's really sad that we're not able to flesh out a lot of this work as a group in this committee. And I know we're running out of time, but that chaos has been manufactured, and I'm really distraught.
I am equally as uncomfortable with the pace this has gone at.
The governor came out with this proposal, 2 months into the session. It's really unfair that we are being put in this position.
It is not fair.
One comment but before that is that at the beginning of the session, I remember speaking to John Zoomer, who knows this building pretty darn well, as he anticipated this. He said, Act 60 or these types of conversations taking on these big topics is going to lead to a very stressful and chaotic end of the session. So I kind of anticipated this, and that's what I'm feeling in right now. But just to your point, that doesn't mean that what we're doing is the right thing for the mom. If we're still working it out and nobody knows the answer. But to the point I want to make, I was just looking at the really nice list of questions somebody pulled together for us on Monday, and I think we've answered them all for one. That was to
What's
Julia. You remember that 2-page, that exactly right.
Yeah.
That's the list of questions. I think the one that I see that we haven't answered, the one out of many, is the inflation adjustment. Did we agree to have this auto inflated, the base amount with NIPA?
The house is NIPA.
I think they've all got NIPA, so if we don't change it, it'll be NIPA.
Welcome, Tom.
There was a report in the House version of the bill. There's also a report back from JFO about what is the appropriate
Okay.
index to use. They use NIPA as a placeholder.
We can put that in.
That has actually remains in the Senate version, still have the report on the inflator.
Okay.
Is there-
How long will it take to get a clean version?
I don't think it would actually take that long. There are a few changes I have to make based on what we've just discussed. But, you know, within 45 minutes, I mean,
Good change. 4:30.
I gotta get you out of here before 5 and you're not getting out.
if you just let me
You're gonna have
leave, I can
that
do
Or
as fast
after
as-
7 is the other option.
Yeah.
Go.
I'll just.
Let's take a break until